we have what the world wants. Take on the energy side, we are an energy superpower.
What happens when Canada stops fighting Donald Trump on lumber, autos, and tariffs, and instead reaches for the one weapon Washington fears the most? Not milk, not softwood, energy. If Ottawa ever turned electricity exports, hydro flows, and its clean power surplus into a strategic counterstrike, the United States would face an economic shock that no tariff, no executive order, and no press conference could fix. Because in today's economy, especially one trying to dominate artificial intelligence, energy isn't just fuel, it's oxygen. Let's break down the scenario Trump cannot ignore: Canada using energy as its hidden ace in the trade war.
Wind West is Tim Houston's massive plan to turn 4 sites into offshore wind farms and export the excess power Nova Scotia wouldn't use to Quebec and Ontario, maybe even the U.S.
The starting point is Nova Scotia's Wind West mega project. Premier Tim Houston, supported by Prime Minister Mark Carney's new budget, is preparing 4 massive offshore wind zones with the potential to generate up to 66 gigawatts of clean electricity, more than Atlantic Canada could ever use on its own. The plan is simple: export the surplus to Ontario, Quebec, and, critically, to the United States. The timing could not be more strategic. The U.S. is walking straight into an electricity crunch. Data center construction is exploding across the country. AI training clusters are demanding levels of power no one planned for. The International Energy Agency warns the United States may need more new electricity in the next 5 years than it added in the previous 20. Deloitte predicts AI alone could require more than 100 gigawatts of additional load by the mid-2030s. And while the demand curve is shooting upward, Donald Trump is simultaneously blocking U.S. offshore wind development through executive orders and court interventions. America needs more electricity than ever, yet the president himself is slamming the brakes on the very industry that could supply it. This is the backdrop for today's analysis. What happens if Canada decides to use its energy leverage in the 2025-2026 trade war? Most Americans have no idea how dependent the United States is on Canadian electricity, oil, and natural gas. Canada is the largest foreign supplier of all three, and that dependency isn't symbolic, it is structural. During winter peaks, parts of New York, New England, Michigan, and the Midwest physically cannot meet demand without power flowing across the border. Hydro-Quebec alone sends nearly 50 terawatt-hours south every year. Many U.S. utilities quietly rely on Canadian imports to manage volatility, stabilize their grid, and avoid blackouts. Now imagine adding a future Atlantic wind corridor capable of 66 gigawatts on top of that. Canada doesn't need to cut the power to gain leverage. It only needs to decide where new power will flow first: toward Europe, toward Asia, toward domestic clean hydrogen projects, or toward the United States. In a trade war, that becomes powerful bargaining currency. Donald Trump's second-term economic agenda rests on 3 big goals: reshoring manufacturing, using tariffs to force strategic concessions, and outpacing China in AI and semiconductor development. Every part of that agenda requires an enormous and stable supply of electricity. If Canada shifts energy priorities, the damage lands directly on the heart of Trump's economic platform. The first hit would be to AI infrastructure. Data center developers are already sounding alarms about power shortages in Texas, Virginia, Arizona, California, and the Midwest. If Canadian exports slow or shift, those shortages deepen. Training clusters get delayed. Cloud providers slow expansion. The US-China AI rivalry tilts. The second hit strikes industrial reshoring. Trump wants factories, auto plants, steel mills, chip packaging lines, battery gigafactories to return from Mexico and Asia. But heavy industry does not grow without stable, predictable power. Higher electricity prices or recurring shortages would cause companies to reconsider relocation plans or cancel them entirely. Trump's promise of a manufacturing revival begins to crumble. The third impact lands politically. The states most dependent on Canadian energy, New York, Vermont, Minnesota, Massachusetts, Michigan, are states Trump cannot afford to destabilize heading into the 2026 USMCA review. If electricity bills rise or reliability warnings spread, political blame will quickly fall on Washington, not Ottawa. Mark Carney's federal budget marks a shift in how Canada thinks about energy. Instead of treating clean power solely as a climate instrument, Ottawa is reframing it as an economic asset, something that can attract industries, fuel exports, and strengthen Canada's global bargaining position. The budget expands clean energy tax credits, accelerates approval timelines for transmission lines, funds major nation-building projects such as Wind West, and invests in hydrogen, nuclear, LNG, and critical mineral supply chains. Canada is not only producing more energy, it is producing the kind of energy global markets want: clean, reliable, long-term, and cost-stable. That gives Ottawa something Washington cannot replicate quickly, especially with Trump blocking U.S. offshore wind and slowing permitting for alternative sources. Trump can raise tariffs on lumber or beef. He can shout at automakers. He cannot shout electricity into existence, and that reality gives Canada quiet but formidable leverage. For decades, energy has been the most invisible part of the Canada-US relationship. But in an era defined by AI, electrification, and industrial competition, it becomes the most powerful tool in the drawer. If Trump continues escalating tariffs and pushing U.S. companies out of Canada, Ottawa has an option it has never used but has always possessed: redirecting its energy advantage. This is not about shutting down the lights in America. It is about deciding who gets access to the next century's most critical resource. Canada already has that resource. Trump desperately needs it. And if a full-scale economic confrontation ever erupts, one question will determine the outcome. Is Trump prepared for a trade war where Canada controls the power? Literally.
We've got breaking news to bring you this hour concerning Canada's auto sector. General Motors is dropping electric van production at its plant near London, Ontario.
Across Canada this week, a quiet shock spread through the industrial heartland. In less than 7 days, two of the country's largest auto employers, General Motors and Stellantis, announced that they were scaling back or pulling production from Ontario. First came Stellantis, moving its Jeep Compass line to Illinois. Then, General Motors confirmed that it would halt production of its BrightDrop electric vans at the Cami assembly plant in Ingersoll, cutting roughly 1,200 jobs. For many, it felt like a heavy blow to a nation that helped build the North American auto industry. These plants were not just workplaces, they were symbols of a country that earned its place through skill, fairness, and persistence. Yet when the layoffs hit, the response from Canada was not rage, it was resilience.
I'll tell you how the Prime Minister how he will deal with the auto sector. He will look at the auto workers in the eyes and he will say, "We will fight for your job."
Canada built cars, steel, and trust, and now it is fighting to protect all three. This isn't just another story about factories closing. It is a test of identity for a country that believes cooperation is stronger than coercion. What's unfolding is not a story of defeat, but a story of a nation rediscovering its strength when the world tests it most. And that fight is being led by Prime Minister Mark Carney and Industry Minister Melanie Joly, who are turning national frustration into action.
Obviously tough news this morning for the workers in Ingersoll for GM. I had a conversation with the Canadian CEO of GM this morning. I had a conversation with the head of Unifor, who represents the employees, and a conversation with Doug Ford and Vic Fideli, his Minister of Economic Development. So we've decided altogether that we would be creating a new response group because we need to make sure that we fight for these jobs.
When the news broke from GM, the reaction inside Ottawa was immediate. Industry Minister Melanie Joly held early morning calls with the CEO of GM Canada, the president of the Unifor Labour Union, and Ontario leaders Doug Ford and Vic Fedeli. By midday, the federal and provincial governments had agreed to create a new response group aimed at bringing a new vehicle model to Ingersoll. It was a coordinated effort to reassure workers that their government wasn't walking away. The same team is also reviewing the Stellantis file after the company's decision to shift 3,000 jobs to the U.S. left Brampton reeling. Joly told reporters that every contract signed with Stellantis includes clear job and investment obligations. Ottawa and Queen's Park, he said, will hold the company accountable for every commitment linked to federal and provincial support. Carney's approach has been calm but firm. His government is refusing to rush into any deal with Washington simply to show progress before next month's APEC summit in South Korea. As Carney explained earlier this week, Canada will not set artificial deadlines or sign a deal that isn't in the best interest of Canadian workers. The government is balancing patience with resolve, making it clear that protecting Canada's long-term industrial strength comes before any short-term political win. Meanwhile, Joly's tone has reflected growing frustration across the country. In public appearances, she has spoken of standing up to corporate pressure and defending the dignity of Canadian labor. Her language resonates with a population that feels it has given enough in tax breaks, in loyalty, in good faith, only to see multinational companies pack up for political reasons south of the border. This is not just a response to one bad week. It's the beginning of a broader shift in how Canada defends its industries and its people.
Behind these corporate decisions lies the ripple effect of Washington's economic nationalism. Since early 2025, the Trump administration has reintroduced sweeping import duties, ranging from 10 to 100% on a range of goods, including vehicles and auto parts from Canada. The White House argues that these measures will bring jobs home. In practice, they have pushed automakers to relocate operations, not for efficiency, but to avoid new tariffs. It's a strategy that may play well politically, but it is backfiring economically. Instead of strengthening North America, it's fragmenting it. Supply chains that once flowed smoothly between Windsor, Detroit, and Brampton are now tangled in red tape and uncertainty. The impact is not confined to Canada. American parts suppliers, shipping firms, and dealerships are also feeling the squeeze. Analysts at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce warned in September that ongoing tariffs are raising consumer costs and disrupting production schedules across the continent. Facing this pressure, Canada has chosen a different path. Rather than retaliate, it is diversifying. Carney's government has intensified outreach across Asia, finalizing a trade deal with Indonesia, engaging with multiple APEC members, and reopening channels with China. Ottawa's message is clear. If Washington turns inward, Canada will not wait idly by. Ironically, Trump's effort to dominate the North American market is pushing his closest ally to look elsewhere. The attempt to make America stronger is instead driving its most trusted partner to build new alliances and new independence. On the streets of Ontario, the news from GM and Stellantis has felt personal. Families who built their lives around factory shifts and weekend hockey now face uncertainty. Yet, amid the anxiety, a new mood is taking shape, one defined less by despair and more by pride. In towns like Ingersoll and Brampton, local groups have launched Buy Canadian campaigns. Community leaders are urging citizens to support domestic suppliers and small manufacturers. Workers who once competed across assembly lines are now united by a single goal: keeping Canada's industry alive. This collective determination mirrors the government's tone. When Carney and Joly speak of fighting for Canadian jobs, they are tapping into something deeper than politics. They are channeling a form of quiet patriotism that values self-reliance without arrogance. Canada's strength has never come from shouting the loudest. It comes from standing firm when others waver.
Trump's rhetoric often fuels confrontation. Canada's answer is persistence, where Washington pushes with threats, Ottawa counters with endurance and partnership. The message is simple. They can move factories, but they can't move Canada's resolve. The challenge now is to turn that resolve into a blueprint, one that ensures workers in Ontario, Quebec, and across the prairies can see a future in the industries that once defined them. The fight over GM and Stellantis is not only about 2 plants or 4,000 jobs, it's about the principle that smaller nations have the right to defend their economic sovereignty in a global system that often favors power over fairness. Trump's trade policies may have won him a few symbolic victories in headlines, but they are isolating the United States at a critical time. By weaponizing tariffs, Washington is undermining the trust that made North America an integrated economic force for decades. That trust cannot be rebuilt through threats, only through cooperation. Canada, meanwhile, is quietly proving that resilience can be a strategy. By standing its ground, holding corporations accountable, and pursuing new trade opportunities, it is showing that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it works patiently, methodically, and with purpose. Carney and Jolie's defiance is not just political theater. It is a statement of national identity, that Canada will not be reduced to a bargaining chip in someone else's economic war. As the dust settles, one truth stands out. In the age of tariffs and turmoil, Canada's greatest export may not be cars or minerals, but resilience, the quiet confidence to stand tall when others choose to shout.